All right, hello class. I hope we all had a wonderful weekend. So remember, on Friday we talked about experiments and how experiments are things that scientists do to figure things out. So we talked about two different things. We talked about controls and we talked about variables. Can somebody remind me what a variable is?
From what I remember, variable is something that can be changed in the experiment to see the effect that it causes.
Yes, that is great. All right, so as you guys, I have assumed that you guys have written down our lovely objective today as you guys do that as you walk into class. So students will be able to identify an independent and dependent variable in a given experiment. So there's two types of variables that we didn't talk about on Friday. So we're going to start off with independent variables. Can somebody tell me what independent means in our everyday lives first, though? Nick.
You don't have to rely on something to get things done.
Mm-hmm. Yep, so you can get your own food, you can do your own thing, right? So an independent variable in an experiment means that it is independent, so it doesn't rely on anything else. So what that means is that you as the experimenter will change it, but nothing else affects it. So it's just kind of its own thing.
So it's really isolated.
Yeah, it's isolated, correct. It's a good word for it, so it's isolated. So then we have something called a dependent variable. What does dependent mean in our everyday lives?
Well, that you're relying on something else.
Mm-hmm.
So until you get your driver's license, you are dependent on your parent to drive you.
That's a perfect example. Or another example is your food or your dog relies on you to give them food, right? So a dependent variable in science and in an experiment, it depends on something else. So to change that, it depends on something else in your experiment. So let's use the example of we're testing to see what affects plant growth. So an independent variable example would be the amount of water that you give it, the amount of sunlight you give the plant, or what type of soil you put in it. Maybe it's rocky soil, maybe it's really dirt, like really fine dirt. A dependent variable in that would be the plant's growth. So the plant, to get it to grow, you have to give it the independent variable, right? So that's either the water, the sunlight, or the dirt, okay? So let's do an example together. So remember how coins get all kind of gross and yucky, and we want to make our pennies nice and shiny, okay? So let's think about an experiment. What would be an independent variable that we could kind of manipulate and change to then do our dependent variable? So maybe let's identify our dependent variable first. I find that the easiest.
Probably the shininess, or what you judge as the shininess of the coin.
Yep, so that's our dependent variable. So what would be our independent variable?
What'd you do to get it shiny?
Okay, what would you do to get it shiny?
Different soaps.
Different soaps. Maybe even like using a toothbrush versus a rag, right? So those would be independent variables. Does anybody have any questions about independent or dependent variables? We're going to move into another activity that we'll have practice with our partners, but I want to make sure everyone has an understanding.
Got it.
Awesome. So we're going to learn a cheer or a statement about how to remember this, because if you got a little statement, it's easier to remember as you're doing stuff. So our first statement is independent is changed or manipulated. So everybody say that with me. Independent is changed or manipulated, and dependent is measured. Dependent is measured. All right, awesome everybody. Okay.